Okay, so I think that we all are here now, so we'll go ahead and get started this morning.
Triple bypass.
We'll go ahead and get started. Greg, are we recording? Are we ready to go on that end? Thank you very much. And so this is Monday, September 18th, 2023. It's 9 a.m. And this is our second of a new series called our Citizen Interactive Session, where members of the public can reach out about topics that they would like to have a more in-depth discussion about that just can't happen at a regular city council meeting and nor at a work session. And so we set up these times. And this morning, we are welcoming Lynn Stockton, and we're going to be talking and listening about enforcing vehicle size restrictions on Main Street to reduce noise. I'll turn it over to our Deputy City Manager, Ann Morgenthaler.
Sure, and I'm here just to help facilitate this morning. And as a reminder, this is only our second one, so we're still getting in the groove of how these work, but the objective is for it to be a time when citizens can share information about a topic that's on their mind, like Mayor Bynum said, and she described the topic today. And then council members can ask more information of the citizen in order to hear your perspective, and then have a discussion so that citizens can also understand council's perspective. And as staff, we're here to support with information as needed when either citizens or council have questions about the topic at hand. And so that's why it's a little different than just the normal citizen comment where citizens are able to just give a comment and then council can't respond or engage. So I will be jumping in here and there just to keep the conversation on track, and then also end us on time a little bit before 10 so that we can shift gears and move and get ready for our council work session. So I don't mean to interrupt people, but I may be here and there just to make sure that it seems like everyone gets what they need out of this morning.
Perfect. Ms. Stockton, why don't you go ahead and start? You gave us all a piece of paper, but maybe you could just talk through it, what your concerns are and what you see as the
How is this
issue.
working? Are you all hearing me very well?
Yep.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly how to keep it at distance. I gave you my basic bullet points. Since then, I spoke to Nick Purdy, I believe his name is, and I realized that some of the things that I have pointed out may not be doable. So these are just suggestions and brainstorming and trying to come to a solution. As you can see on my bullet points, the objective is to improve walking traffic for merchants downtown to increase the revenue. I personally do not ever go downtown, rarely, because the noise level on the main street is so incredibly loud that it is very difficult to go down even with just a friend and talk while you're going down the street, let alone going in and out of the stores. Unfortunately, I come from the Front Range a long time ago, like everybody else who's migrated, and I know what Arvada did. I know what Boulder did. I'm not suggesting we do what Boulder is because we're not Boulder, but I know that there could be other solutions if we look for them, and that is my objective today. The objective here on the Montrose, on the western slope, is Grand Junction, is an example. Now, I realize the highway is the main CDOT issue, and that was being explained to me, and I was a little concerned about, I'm kind of going all over the place here, but I saw the September 7th, the agenda regarding the IGA with CDOT for US 50 and Highway 50. That kind of keys into my suggestions because on my bullet points, I'd indicated I think there needs to be a blockade of some sort where passenger cars only can come through Main Street, and everything else has to be taken the bypass avenue. That bypass was erected for that specific purpose. When you sit at Horsefly during the summer, you can hear 18-wheelers coming down Main Street. I've seen them. And yes, some of them are local deliveries, but some of them are not. You can find big, huge, humongous motorhomes with a carrier with a car and a carrier with an ATV, which is beyond the weight limits that are required. So I did talk with Nick, and he had indicated there was, in fact, signage right at the bypass indicating there was a weight limit for vehicles, and they should be taking the bypass. I'm not seeing that. I've been here 8 years, and I'm not seeing that the bypass is being utilized by the vehicles that are required to utilize it. Case in point, you also have large, I call them muscle trucks, who come zooming down Main Street and going boom, 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 along with motorcycles. There's no limitation in terms of noise ordinances. There's no limitation in terms of, as I see it being enforced, speed limit. So the entire Main Street is just an obscene noise level pretty much throughout most of the summer and when everybody's active throughout summer sunny days. According to my bullet points here, what I really would have liked to have done is to put a blockade like those big, huge planters that are alongside, I forget what street it is, that kind of blocks off the entrance a little bit so that it perhaps narrows it. What I would really like to see is some sort of an aesthetic blockade right at the bypass and Main Street, so that only passenger cars can come through, and they are not able to, I mean, we have, obviously, this is a rural community, so you have horse trailers pulling horses. I've seen that on Main Street. And I think there needs to be a way for the enforcement of the weight limits to force them onto the bypass so that Main Street can be a relatively nice retail experience. Grand Junction does that, but I realize, of course, Grand Junction doesn't have to deal with the CDOT level that is we are dealing with, and that is part of the problem. I've been told we can't block off or partially block off the bypass and Main Street. That's something that cannot be done. But I think what needs to be done is that a noise ordinance needs to be in place so that the really loud vehicles coming down Main Street can no longer do that and be enforced also. I also think that a larger signage or some way of actually attracting the attention of the large vehicles, saying, no, you cannot come down Main Street, you have to use the bypass, needs to be implemented. So in my bullet points, that's basically what I had proposed. Some of it is probably not doable, but I'm trying to brainstorm to find out how we could make the retail experience more pleasant, much like Grand Junction, rather than a thoroughfare that's so loud you can't even talk when you're going down the street. I know the city had tried to put outdoor seating for dining, and that kind of seemed to be a failure because I personally wouldn't want to dine outside when there's loud noises right next to me. So I don't know what happened to that project, but I saw it for a while and then it kind of went away. Mostly, the goal is to bring people downtown to do their shopping. That's the goal. And retail has been suffering because of the noise factor. And so I'm here today to say, is there a solution? Can we do something different than what has been presently in place that requires a change of traffic pattern so that it's a much more pleasant experience to go downtown?
Sure.
And ultimately, Montrose gains revenue because the small businesses are gaining revenue. The walk-in traffic becomes more increased because they're like, well, isn't this pleasant? I'd love to be just able to sit down and have a glass of wine and not have a loud noise environment to enjoy that. I'm very envious of Grand Junction because they don't have the issue of the CDOT highway, and that is the problem.
And I wonder
Yes.
if now, in this part, might be a time, and Mayor Bynum, tell me if you agree, to clarify some information, and we could lean on staff just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what Main Street is and what it isn't, in
Right.
terms of the relationship with CDOT and the bypass, but we could do that quickly.
Because I was going to suggest that before we go to staff for facts, it would be fun to brainstorm with council and Ms. Stockton. But I think we can clarify real quickly about the stretch between the bypass and Main Street, and who's best to do that?
I was thinking Jim might. And it's just, I think that piece, so we don't need to share everything, but what is Main
For sure.
Street?
So the bypass, San Juan Avenue that goes from Main Street to Townsend, basically does that big bypass around town. That is CDOT-owned right-of-way. Between San Juan and Townsend is a city street.
I verified that.
Yeah, it
and I
used
did
to
not
be
know that.
CDOT highway, and then when the bypass was built, it was swapped. And so between San Juan and Townsend is a city street. So Main Street downtown, up to Townsend is a city street.
Is under our
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
And my understanding, I think that was done either right when I got on council or right before, but my understanding was we did that so as a city, we would have some control over that section of Main Street, and we could do with it what we wanted. And I think, and I'll let you all chime in, but I think that we have always toyed with the idea of making Main Street less traffic and more pedestrian friendly. And when we start to go that way, maybe by changing the parking a little or putting in the medians at one point, that there's a lot of pushback, that now we've made it really hard to drive through Main Street. And that some business owners want to see more pedestrians, but some business owners think their customers won't come if they can't park outside their store. So you mentioned Grand Junction a few times, and I think you're referring to when they redid their Main Street and they made it like curvy and they made it so you could drive down there, but it was no longer the best way to get through town. And I've always thought that would be really fun to do in Montrose, and every time we kind of start doing that, we get pushback. So I don't know, what do you guys think about how the city could use that section of Main Street?
I think one thing for
Do you want to turn
clarification,
it on your microphone? Thank you.
I think one thing for clarification is West Main from Townsend West is a state highway, so we don't have any control of that section
Yeah.
of it.
Let's just talk about between the San Juan bypass and Townsend, that section of Main Street. Ed?
Well, I'm listening to her talk about the noise and stuff, and I believe we do have a noise ordinance. The thing that I was kind of interested in was the fact that I was on Main Street over the weekend walking up and down. And I was kind of disappointed in the fact that I almost got ran over by bicyclists speeding down the Main Street, heading over toward, heading east. And there was like 7 of them, just one right behind the other, and I'm kind of dodging and stuff. I don't believe, in my opinion, that the design of Montrose, its original design, doesn't really set itself up for doing something like Grand Junction. In order to do something like that, we'd have to take like 3rd or 4th Street maybe and make that a straight all the way through going east and west. And it just seems to me that, for example, there's more and more people from the county that are using the Main Street to get to highway going east, and sometimes to go all the way to the bypass and around and going right.
It's a pain. Yeah.
It's a pain, and sometimes some people do it and sometimes they don't, so.
Okay, so now other council members chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, to address your point about the noise, I think you raised some very good issues that we need to contemplate and think about. I think that the bypass was put in for a purpose, and it is probably not being utilized to the extent that it should be.
Not at all.
And there probably are some things we can do to encourage the use of the bypass. And I'm sorry, if a person just can't get a straight shot through town and they may have to take the bypass, that's okay with me. I don't have a problem with that. I think when the city swapped with, excuse me, with CDOT, there was a stated purpose. And with it being in our control now, I think we can do some, some rather ingenious things that might help solve the situation.
Are you referring to this one item on the city council meeting for the, and I didn't read the entire PDF, the IGA with CDOT for US 5550?
Well, that's a little bit different.
That really has nothing to
Oh,
do
it's
with Main
different.
Street.
Because this is a city street we're talking about now, and this is and you can probably better address it than I, but
Right.
that really has to do with the long-term plan for access to 50 and going into the future. So it really doesn't affect what we're specifically talking about today. I think the important thing to remember here is the city does have jurisdiction over the
Right.
the
And I
distance that
didn't,
you're
and
talking
I did not
about.
know that until just recently, and that was a confusing to me as to
Right.
where CDOT was ending and we began.
Right.
And I did verify that. Nick has been very, very helpful. In fact, all the staff, I call up and I say, "This is Lynn Stockton," and I guess my husband said, "Well," somebody said, "Are you David Stockton?" And I said, he said, "Yeah." And he says, "Do you have a wife named Lynn?" And I said, he said, "Yes." She calls a lot. And I went, "Yeah, I probably do."
So one of the things I think is also very important to recognize is that a lot of the trucks and a lot of the vehicles rely on GPS because they're not familiar with our city.
And-
the GPS systems
Yes, I know.
don't always show that. When we have RVs trying to go over Black Bear Pass because their GPS said that's the shortest route. And we have, I think, the same thing with a lot of the truck traffic is that their GPS system says that this is the shortest route to go to get south. And for them to drive all the way north up the bypass and then come south down on Townsend, their GPS doesn't even acknowledge it.
I've had this discussion, I believe, with Scott and several others, superintendents of the street superintendent. Apparently, there is a weight restriction sign at Hillcrest and Niagara. And I said, I brought forth the idea, well, if you're cutting through Highway 50 at 6700, you're going to need weight restriction signs there also. And he said, well, the problem at Hillcrest is that GPS guides them down there. And I said, that's insane. And he said, no, and we tried to get it fixed, and we can't get it fixed.
Yeah, that's not even remotely in our control, unfortunately.
Well, I
And
think,
the other aspect is, like, I think that when Ed brought that up, that, when we were talking about the east section of the town of Main Street, we do have control, but the west section is CDOT still. And so that when their GPS locks on and it says, okay, I need to go from here to here, it connects the dots, whether it's a city street or CDOT. And that's one of the issues that I would love for us to be able to figure out is how to get these guys to update
Well, their GPS would route them around it if it was,
if it was the fastest.
yeah,
or the
and,
shortest.
right. So what we do have control over, and I want to bring council back and see if you guys would chime in, do we want to see the city of Montrose take our 10 blocks between Townsend and the bypass and do and plan for and budget for in the future a radical redesign of that section of Main Street.
Well, I think there's two considerations. One is the long-term consideration as far as reconfiguration and all, but in the short term, within our financial ability to do so, what can we do to specifically address the problem that she is raising relative to noise? Can we incentivize in some way, primarily 18-wheelers from cruising down Main Street?
Right. And let's have staff respond to some of the current situations I think it's nice we've got the city engineer, the director of public works, the chief of police here, and I think they can all respond to what we can do now, but no one's answered my question. Do you guys think that we should radically redesign Main Street as a more pedestrian-friendly, traffic-calming,
I think,
Expensive to.
maybe you guys
expensive.
don't want, and yeah, it would be a long-term project.
I think my answer is, yes, we should further study that and understand what the ramifications are and perhaps have public meetings on that specific issue, but that's part two. Part one is addressing the immediate concern that she raises, which
Right.
I believe is a legitimate concern, and I think there are some things we can do in the short term.
May I interject? I think it's a pretty simple thing. Number one, put a noise ordinance in place and enforce it. And I guess that would be under Blaine's jurisdiction, I guess.
Okay, let's go to staff and get you guys all to chime in with your area of expertise relative to noise, weight limits, signage, any facts you can bring to the conversation.
You bet. So the city of Montrose does have a noise ordinance already in place. So the ordinance is 6121, and the ordinance states that any noise that a citizen hears that is otherwise harassing is against the ordinance. However, it's important to be able to prove those specific situations. So a little bit of history on the background of our noise ordinance. It's had some changes over the last few years. There was a push, probably about 15 years ago, I would say, maybe 20. We have, and we still do today, the loud stereo cars, So to help codify that so our officers could prove a specific violation in that regard, our council passed very specific things that made it necessary to prove that ordinance. So a police officer had to be seated in their vehicle with their windows rolled up, and if they could still hear basically the boom, 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 that was prima facie evidence or probable cause to be able to stop that, write a citation, and then the officer could later testify in court.
Blaine, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How do we get the heavy truck traffic from east to south without coming down Main Street and then getting on Townsend and going across? Because they're not allowed on Hillcrest, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll make a bullet point.
Let's finish the noise piece.
No, that's all right. So I guess the point I was trying to make is in regards to noise, it's usually associated, not the 18-wheelers, but it's usually associated with speed contests and things like that. It's the mufflers that rev up and then they take off. And that doesn't just happen on East Main Street, it actually happens probably more throughout the city as you're sleeping at midnight, and I've called our officers before. Our mayor has as well, and so I think we've actually done a pretty good job. I've noticed a decrease in that, at least during those times when we write citations for that. We have to be in the right place at the right time as a focus for things like 18-wheelers on Main Street. It's a time-intensive type of operation, because if we see an 18-wheeler on East Main Street, we're not just going to stop it right on East Main. We would cause more of a traffic jam than we would anything else. So we have to kind of follow it through to wherever it's going. We usually like to follow it, give it enough time, or that person enough time to see if they're making a local delivery. All of those things that kind of come into play on whether we can develop probable cause to stop the vehicle. There could be some merit, I'll just say that, because I think it happens throughout the entire city, to help codify the noise ordinance a little better for loud mufflers and things like that. I think that is perhaps a direction to go to give our officers a little bit more direction and tools to be able to enforce the loud situation piece or the noise.
I think the key thing you've said, and I know this to be true, I was at a coffee trader one day trying to have a conversation, and we couldn't even talk because of loud motorcycles. But the thing you said that I think is the most important is that the officer has to be at the right place at the right time. If the officer isn't sitting there when that loud car or motorcycle goes by, we can complain about it all we want to, but unless the officer is present, and we don't have enough officers to be able to cover the whole town and have somebody just sit on Main Street and just check noise ordinances.
But
So,
can the average citizen who hears this loud noise with mufflers or whatever, even though the officer is not there to hear it, can they call and complain? And will the officer write a citation based on what the witness saw, and as long as they're available to testify if need be?
Yeah, definitely, we would encourage the citizen to call in and make a complaint. Yes, if there is
catching
enough,
it.
well, if there is enough
Yeah.
evidence, if we can support, because ultimately, we have to be able to prove it in this room beyond a
Right.
reasonable doubt. And so, if there's enough evidence, perhaps like a video or, something, a recording, something like that, that would definitely help us. But we also have to be able to find the vehicle first. So by the time we get there, the citizen makes a complaint, unless the citizen got the license plate, then usually it's just a vehicle description, and we look out for those. We have found them in the past, and then when we usually find them, it's no different for us than it is for the citizen, because it's just loud, and they're usually doing something corresponding to give us enough probable cause to stop them, and we cite them.
I see things on a macro level, and I went through that in my mind's eye. First of all, there's not enough police workforce to be able to monitor that. Second of all, how do you actually track that when they're going and they're gone? So I see things on a macro level, so I've incorporated that into the problem, and I'm here because I'm trying to brainstorm, trying to figure out how to get around that so that an ordinance could be enforced, and whether that's a big, huge sign with, like a cross against a circle with a cross or whatever. And I know people do not read signs. I've been in retail long enough and customer service long enough to know that they do not read signs. But if they're huge and they've got a big cross across them, it then at least draws attention, and then you kind of maybe have a half chance of creating some solution.
Yeah.
I just, what bothers me the most is you have not cars anymore, muscle trucks. And they come through with the ATVs loaded up in their trucks, 3 or 4 of them at a time. And then you got motorcycle riders who are coming, going boom, 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 boom. And those are really what I'm specifically talking about, more than music, or it's the obvious vehicles that do not belong on Main Street, that are on Main Street and are not using the bypasses.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that, from the police department standpoint, we would look at it globally, not just East Main Street, because the same motorcycle that is upsetting that type of situation on Main Street is also upsetting that person over on Kent Avenue and on Niagara and out in the Brooks. And so, once again, I think that there may be specific ways to codify that just a little bit better, loud mufflers, so that we can, and it's not changing the title of an ordinance. It's just like loud stereos. It's just a subsection of the
Yeah.
noise ordinance. I want to be, you made a comment, and I just want to be careful about saying that we don't have enough officers to do the things that we need to do.
It's
I do-
increased?
Yeah, it has increased. We have a traffic unit officer that is actually just transitioning from the academy, and that's going to be his role. He's the assistant director. We also just created a small unit, but a unit of officers and a sergeant to help tackle some specific community-wide issues. And so I think our abilities to be able to address some of these things will increase. So it's just a matter of focus and having, at times, the manpower. But just like the pedestrian issue with almost getting run over on East Main Street, sometimes it just requires us to do special operations. It requires us to pay a bit of overtime at times too, but I know that had a profound effect when we did those operations. It's probably time to do it again. So I think we just need to look at the situation and see how we can address it better.
Chief Hall, before you're done and we pass it to somebody else, can you just quickly address the speed limit piece? Because she also mentioned the speed limit. And I know you didn't mean it's never, ever enforced, because I personally have experienced that it is.
It is.
When the city first changed that to 25 miles an hour, I don't think I was the only one who was caught a little off guard. But can you talk about the efforts that your team is doing with this speed limit? We talked about
Absolutely.
noise, but speed was another
Yeah.
concern.
No, we do enforce the speed limit on East Main Street. It's not just based on complaint, but it's also when we have the time to be on East Main Street and enforce that, we do. That's also another focus from or will be a focus from our traffic unit officer. We just graduated the academy here this last Friday, and so he's transitioning into that traffic unit role, and he'll be a dedicated resource for all of those things, including East Main Street. But we do proactively patrol East Main and stop for speeding.
And it's all at 25 miles an hour.
Correct.
And that goes all the way from, it's a long stretch.
It is a little deceptive, because as soon as you, traveling eastbound past San Juan, you think that it opens up, and it actually doesn't. It stays 25 for a bit of time.
Since we're talking about that, I'm extremely glad to hear that you have enough workforce to monitor the road traffic, because once you're cutting through 6700 and Highway 50, and I was the one that brought that up, the signage needs to be right at the entrance for weight restrictions, because I have seen Cisco 18-wheelers delivering on the south side using 6700. Once Highway 50 is cut through to 6700 and it becomes a thoroughfare,
Right.
then that needs to be monitored, because the time is money for the 18-wheelers.
Right.
And they're going to take the shortest route possible.
Yeah, they will.
And that short route is 6700.
And somebody asked me the question, what was the recommendation for people coming in from the east and going south for those 18-wheelers? They're supposed to go down Highway, and they're supposed to make the right, hit the bypass, go up to Townsend, and then travel south down Townsend. I don't know that their GPS even directs them that way.
Yeah.
So I think Councilman Ulibarri had a question, so I'll pass the.
No, that was the answer that I was looking for. Okay. I do know that, if I'm not mistaken, they're going to be changing some regulations on concerning roundabouts, and that's giving bigger trucks the right-of-way, and
Oh, yeah.
that's a state legislature doing that. And again, without having the other bypass completed, it's to make it go north and south traffic, it's going to be hard to, to control that situation unless we have police officers at both ends directing traffic. And as far as some of the the bigger motor homes and stuff like that coming through town. I mean, we advertise all the time to come and see beautiful Montrose, and if we start putting restrictions on who can drive down Main Street in particular, why would people want to visit us and have to drive around our downtown and park blocks away to be able to walk downtown? I mean, it's to me, it's kind of like right and left hand trying to meet together, and it just makes it real difficult to figure out what kind of a situation to do. You don't see those big motorhomes going through Grand Junction, Main Street. A lot of their traffic is residential going down there, and our residentials go to the south end of town to buy their wares.
I want to give the rest of our staff a time to chime in on currently how things work, what we could do, where the bumpers are on any changes. So I turn it over to you two.
Yeah, I can talk real quick about, kind of how the signage is set up and actually a project that's in the works. So right now, if you're approaching, like, coming into town from Gunnison, say, it's really settled, it's kind of, and we want to improve it for this reason. There's a sign, and it's about this tall, and it says, no commercial vehicles over 10,000 feet, GVW on Hillcrest, per city ordinance, blah, 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 blah. So it's a book. Most don't even know it's there because it is a book. It's kind of the nature. People don't read signs. If signs have a lot of words on them, people really don't read signs. So prompted by the 6700 project, we are looking to completely revamp that. We need to work with CDOT because we want to put advanced warning signs on the highways before, because once you turn onto the road, it's too late. So we need it from an enforcement standpoint because we don't want a truck pulled over. If they're from, the Midwest or something, why would they know that we don't allow trucks on our local roads? But the intent is, large commercial vehicles, so this doesn't get into the noise piece of it, but large commercial vehicles are not to use city streets as a bypass. They're supposed to stay to the highways. We're looking to make that signage more standardized. There's also one, I actually didn't know about it until about 2 weeks ago when this came up, that right before Main Street, it's on the approach there on San Juan. It kind of just says, I think it's like trucks and no trucks. But
Small.
Is that San Juan or is that West Main? It's kind of unclear. So, possibly looking at converting that signage, to put on the banner arms or something, so it's clear that, going straight on Main Street is not allowed. So we're working on that to standardize it, make it not be so lengthy, have it use standard symbols. The other piece we need to think about with that, and this may come to council, is standardizing the definition. So right now, kind of by standard CDOT, standard DOT definition of a commercial vehicle is 26,000 pounds. Right now, our weight restriction is 10,000, which an F-350 is GVW of over 10,000, with the trailers over 10,000. So we don't want every truck in town to all of a sudden be illegal either. And so in order to use those standard symbols, they need to mean something, which goes back to standard DOT stuff. So that's all stuff that's in the works and will be happening, within the next 6 months, probably naturally anyway. And it's a good chance to try and help that. The other piece of that is we can throw in, I don't know if you've seen them around town, some of the, the guy holding his ears or whatever that sign is. And it says noise ordinance enforced. Looking at I think that was a big effort, probably 20 years ago. A lot of them are pretty faded. This is probably a good chance to incorporate that with it.
Yeah, and to that regard, also make sure our ordinances match. And do those signs, do you think they carry any more weight if at the bottom of the sign it says per, and it either says a CRS statute or a local ordinance statute, or do you think the sign it doesn't need to?
Maybe from
Not in our world. We'd like, I guess in our world, we would prefer not to, because people, the more you put on there, the less likely it is to be read.
Right, and now the chief of police is going to tell us why it's easier to write a ticket if.
Yeah, you just said it. So it helps us prove it if it's no different than trespassing. So when we put the trespassing, no trespassing here, we cite the ordinance because that helps us prove it later in court.
Okay.
That it wasn't just this, but it's associated with the ordinance.
So as we move forward on all these signs, and including perhaps, Jim, when we do budget and do large welcome to Montrose signs, perhaps in a friendly way, we can welcome to Montrose and, just, it feels like all being on the same page going forward and making the ordinances line up with what works, with what works for writing the tickets. It all comes together.
Yeah, I think our wayfinding project is a good example of that even unrelated to streets, but some of our park signs, we've had to work closely with the police department to make sure that they do both. They're welcoming, but they also allow for enforcement, so I think that's what you're saying, that
That's exactly what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. Thanks.
And any signage stuff, we go through as a panel, so we have kind of a traffic task force that brings in legal, PD, all of those when we make any of these kinds of changes to make sure that it works holistically, for the whole system, and it gives them what they need for enforcement is a big part of that. And so, yeah, so that's in the works. I think that kind of helps improve the situation as best you can on the signage front. As far as, monument entrance right there at San Juan, I think that's been talked about a lot over the years. I think anything we can do to kind of say, I don't know if you have a big arch over the way, that's been discussed in the past too, but anything that kind of says this is downtown and speaks that this is downtown instead of it looking like a highway is a good thing. And those, whether it's a part of a wholesale revamp or standalone products, those are all viable things.
So what I kind of heard you say is, instead of a barricade, which Ms. Stockton mentioned, you would say it would be perhaps more aesthetic and convey the same thing with like an arch. That's like you're entering a different kind of an area, but that can be done that way instead of a hazard.
Certainly, yeah. Barricades are hard, so if anything, you'd probably have bulb outs take out the shoulder or something, but you're still going to have most likely 2 through lanes. CDOT, so we had this when we did some of the parking conversion on Main Street, and if you'll notice, that didn't start for the first block, and that's, even though they're not CDOT's roads, they still have jurisdiction over the intersections, and so we can't do things that, back up the traffic or cause something that would affect the operations of their intersection, which is still San Juan and Main. So, they just become party to that, and we make sure that whatever we do works, for all the various stakeholders, and then downtown too. So do they want the RVs? Do they not want the RVs? It's really hard to kind of pick out motorcycles outside of noise, those kind of things, of finding that sweet spot that still keeps traffic flowing, because, unfortunately, the way we're set up, we have a lot of volume that goes through there. We have to, unfortunately, design for combines as well. It's funny, the week we were doing the single lane diagonal parking transition, I think it was that night of that open house, we look out and there's a combine with 10, 15 cars behind it. We're like, welcome to Montrose, there's a lot of different stakeholders we have to make sure that we can accommodate, so.
I'd like to piggyback onto what the mayor said. Aesthetically, and I'm asking, I know when I mentioned in my bullet points a blockade, the big, huge cement flower pots that are on, I forget what street it is, but they're an aesthetic addition that kind of creates a visual boundary. I think if we have an arch that she was suggesting that says, welcome to Montrose, or the city by the San Juans, or something that is aesthetically and artistically verbiage, and then have 2 of those huge, huge planters alongside each of the sides of the sign. Aesthetically, it looks nice, and it accomplishes the blockade issue without actually being a blockade. Does that make sense to everybody? I see that as being a nice solution to being able to say, this is a different territory, and you need to go here and not here, if that makes sense.
If an arch was the right height, it could also make it really hard.
I was going to say, kind of like a bridge with a height limit.
Yeah, we could
underneath it.
replace an arch every 6 months, yeah.
I'm chiming in here just to let you know, it's about a 5-minute
Okay.
warning here for the end, so that you can wrap up conversations between council and you, Ms. Stockton,
Okay.
and then I'll chime in to get us finished.
Perfect, so,
So I want to jump back
Yeah,
all the
okay.
way to, you were saying that we didn't respond to your question about redoing the city. We haven't had really much of an opportunity to.
okay,
I think one of the things that I would love to see is actual conversations with our downtown merchants before we start even having that conversation.
that's what I wanted someone to say.
Because right now, when we did the diagonal parking, we got so much blowback. And I would love to have, now that they've had that in place for a while, have the opportunity to talk to the merchants downtown and say, okay, so what do you think? Get feedback from them.
That's
We've also
exactly-
talked about with the median in downtown, and Mr. Murphy's mentioned that actually it's a lot more useful than we think it is to have those medians in there. But before we even get into that conversation, we need to talk to the merchants.
Well, and so I think what I wanted to say about the long-term changes is that that is probably a much bigger discussion, not only for the budget of what that would look like, but with our whole community, including the downtown shops. And that's a conversation we can have if we think it's worth having. If council says we want to dig into that long-term plan, I think that's like a separate thing that we can talk about. I think I think we did a good job of talking about all your different issues, but I'm going to let you take the last few minutes to make sure that you got what you wanted out of the 45 minutes we had this morning.
Absolutely. That's the reason why I gave bullet points to everybody, so they understood what I was trying to cover in a short amount of time. Mostly noise ordinances and some method of forcing the vehicles that are not supposed to be on Main Street onto the bypass. And that is the two primary things that I think we've hashed out and tried to figure out, and at least it's brought forward the issue, and now we can try to find a solution.
Yeah.
I think you've raised some very good points, and I appreciate it. And I think in the short term, there are some things we probably can do. So I would like to see this issue not just be put on the shelf after today's meeting, but to actively pursue what we can do in the short term and have staff kind of put their brains together and come up with some thoughts and ideas about how we can, in the short term, address what you've raised, and thank you for doing that.
I think that's an excellent idea. Thank you. First of all, thank you for even instituting this forum. I appreciate that immensely, because I think that it is an important part of government to hear citizens and to try to understand where they're coming from, as we, as citizens, trying to understand where our government is coming from, particularly our larger government. So I appreciate the effort that has been put into this forum and everybody's attendance. And we'll see where it goes. I'm probably going to be the only person, I don't know that if you've gotten anybody else lined out on the forum, but I probably will be a pretty consistent person coming in to bring forth ideas or thoughts and try to make Montrose a more aesthetically look appealing. Not that we need more people, for heaven's sakes, but at the same time, I'll say it now, we need more veterinarians, and that would be my next subject.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your input.
I got a question for Blaine. On the noise aspect of the ordinance, is there anything that we can add to your vehicles that would assist you in monitoring that?
Not really, no. There's not a specific piece of technology, if you will, that would help with that. I think, once again, it really comes down just to focus. And there may be some things we can specifically address with the ordinance to make it easier for our officers to be able to prove later in court, no different than loud stereos. So that may be a direction we could go.
Thanks.
One
And
final thought before we
Okay.
sign off is Delta just redid their Main Street, and I would love to get some feedback from them on pitfalls, things that worked, things that didn't work. So it's an opportunity for us to reach out to them, perhaps.
Yep.
Delta's redid their Main Street, just see, they did 5 different plans downtown and.
Yeah, they did a temporary,
changes,
yeah.
And now they're moving to the more permanent model of that. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to just talk to them, see
Yeah.
what they did.
So, in kind of trying to wrap this up, thank you very much for bringing this idea. We have been getting a number of ideas from citizens who there's a form online to fill out if folks want to talk to council in one of these interactive sessions that are scheduled for 45 minutes. I know some of the ideas have been so singular that I believe our staff has just been able to get back to the person with an answer to their question, basically. So some are appropriate and work really well for a 45-minute discussion, and other ideas that people have proposed have really just been a question, and I think staff's done a great job at answering those, and they haven't come before us. So staff will continue to look at the requests for citizen interactive sessions and try and find ones that are things that we can have a dialogue about, that we can involve the expertise of our staff about, and we look forward to doing them once a month, and there is a form online for citizens who want to propose an idea they want to come talk to us about. And with that, we're going to go ahead and end this citizen interactive session for this month. We do have one scheduled for October, and we did move the November one forward because of the Thanksgiving week. And we will take a break, and then we'll have our regularly scheduled work session at 10 o'clock this morning. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.